Everyone, Delta One here. We are on our way home from work with some good news and bad news. Well, let's start with the bad news, because the bad news is always, gives the good news a good uplifter. Bad news. I called myself ordering the passenger side seatbelt and driver side seatbelt for the Ram. Well, I ordered that Wednesday or Thursday last week. They told me to take 2 days for it to get there. Basically, it should have been here Tuesday. Today's Thursday. It should have been there latest Tuesday. Well, Tuesday comes around, I decide to, call them. I missed my turn. I decide to call them to find out, if it arrived yet, because they hadn't called me. Well, kind of find out what ended up happening, guys, was they took down my information for my call. I did it over the phone, it just payment over the phone. They took my payment for the, I won't say they took my payment. They took my card information down, but they didn't order the part. So, I don't have neither seatbelt. Even if they would have accidentally ordered only the passenger side seatbelt, I'd have been fine. I could still take it to the dealership. I could still take it to the, why do I keep saying Copart? I keep thinking Copart. I could easily take it to the salvage inspection and get it inspected with just the passenger side, because only the passenger side does not have a seatbelt. The driver's side just doesn't read, which is probably going to be that little connector in the bottom of it, which I might can get away with finding one at the... I don't know. I'd have to look into it to find out. But anyway, essentially what's going on is that now I have to wait God knows how long, maybe another week, maybe 3 days, 2 days, I don't know, if they even ordered it. And then even after that, I still have to wait an additional week to get it, to get it inspected after the fact. There is a silver lining, there is good news. That same day, which was it yesterday? Yeah, yes. Was it yesterday? Yeah. Wednesday, yeah. That same day, my steering wheel control module was set to come in. It came in, so I would have recorded that, but I didn't have my action camera, and my action camera would have been able to give you guys a bird's eye view of what it takes to replace one of these things. And so I needed both hands, because I had to use the steering wheel puller to get the steering wheel off. And while I was in there, I took the little CAN bus modules off of the steering wheel and replaced them with the original ones that came on the steering wheel that I got from the salvage yard that had the additional buttons on it. Because I am planning on adding the radio, the bigger radio, the I think it's an 8-inch or is it 10-inch? I can't remember. I think it's a 10-inch, not the stock 8.4 Uconnect. The aftermarket one, I think it's a 10-inch. I want to say it's a 10-inch. I want to basically change that out, and I want to add the microphone to it anyway. So once I do all that, we're ready to rock and roll. The steering wheel control modules in, the traction control lights are out. The only check engine light I have, I have no check engine light actually. The only light I have is the ABS module, which is still doing a self-test because it doesn't have the occupant restraint module completely. Basically, when you first turn the truck on and start it, I'm gonna get out because it's doing the noise. When you get out of the vehicle and turn it back on again, the module's not initialized. So every time you start the truck, it has to relearn the occupant restraint module sensor that tells it, lateral sensor or G sensor or whatever one you want to call it. And in short, what ends up happening is that the ABS module will not throw a code. What the ABS module will do is it will flash the traction control on and then turn it back off. Essentially, that's what it's doing. I have the steering wheel cowl back on, the kick panel back on the bottom, the knee bolsters on. I don't have the instrument cluster bezel on because that one over there will have to be in it for the inspection, but that one will go back in it afterwards, or unless I can find a 4th gen Ram with that instrument cluster with near my miles. Basically that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I'm still in the middle of servicing the transmission. The engine's been serviced pretty well. It's more than clear. The transmission I'm still working on. That's a work in progress. I have to actually drive the truck to get the transmission fluid to rotate around inside of it. Another reason why this is an issue is because the transmission fluid for these trucks are about $30 a quart. And I really have thought about using the, not the cheaper version. Okay, you guys are looking at trees. Not the cheaper version, but there are 2 fluids out there that claim they meet and exceed the ZF transmission's fluid. One of them is AMSOIL, which still isn't cheap by no means. And then you also have the, what do you call that other one? Something Blue Guard or something blue. I can't remember what it was. I think it's like $15 a quart. These trucks with the 8-speed 845 transmission take 4 quarts per drain. And what that means is, if no one understands what that means, if you only pull the pan or only drain the pan, you're only looking at 4 quarts. If you're doing a complete overhaul where you're trying to get everything out of the torque converter, you're looking at roughly about 8 to 9, depending on what your truck's configured with, what kind of intercooler it's got, how big of the transmission it's going to be, if you have the 70 series or not. And then you have the ZF transmission fluid. Now, the ZF transmission fluid is kind of a debate because technically it's not the same label-wise of the Mopar fluid. Technically it's the same fluid. ZF makes the transmission, ZF has their own fluid, but if you want to get the Mopar brand, you have to get straight through Mopar, technically. So essentially there are 5 transmission fluids for this transmission. You have the ZF8, ZF plus 8, for the actual ZF fluid that goes into BMWs and the Volkswagens. You have the Mopar 8/9 speed transmission fluid, which is essentially the same fluid, it's just rebranded. You have the AMSOIL fluid that it's supposed to also do the same. You have the Blue Guard or whatever it's called. You have that, and then you have another fluid that is, I don't really count it because it's actually just really mineral oil is what it is. Another reason I don't like it, it goes in like a really dark color. But that's why I don't count that one. But the one I do count is that some people have switched over to, it's not an ATF plus 4 fluid, but it is red, which is basically just a dye. And it is made by Valvoline, I want to say. So those are the 5 transmission fluids that I know that people use for these transmissions, but I've thought about really using one of the other cheaper ones to flush the transmission out, and so on and so forth. But what I use to do the transmission fluid, guys, on this is, because to add the transmission fluid on these trucks, you have to be able to get underneath and fill it like a manual transmission. And I use my module, my little spray bottle, to actually get it up in there. It doesn't provide the same amount of pressure that you would if you had the actual specific one, but it suits the means. It's still it's about 15 minutes spill and fill. So, I mean, it's pretty quick. I mean, waiting for the engine to drain all of its oil out will be longer than that. But we're going to look into those types of fluids, and I think I said this in my video before. The transmission service is something I'm not going to ever video, is because there's so much controversy on that. Because in the manual, it does state that you do not have to wait for it to be at a temperature. It just says it has to be at an operating temperature, which is well above. I guess to explain this any further, I'll explain it. I'll put this in a vlog later, and I'll do a specific vlog about this later. But there's two temperatures for this transmission. You have an operating temperature and you have a service temperature, which, like I said, I'll go into later. When you do a transmission fluid change on this transmission, there's no temperature that you have to do it in to drain the fluid for a service. Now, to check it, you have to do the actual, service temperature, which usually when you drain all of if you get it to just into the service operating temperature, well, not service, but operating temperature, and then drain the transmission fluid, when you put the fresh transmission fluid in, typically the temperature will drop below, or it'll drop to the service temperature where you can check it anyway. But I'll cover that in a whole nother video. So, like, I will not do a video on the transmission service. There are certain things you don't touch, and the primary reason for that is because of the controversy that's on it. Like, which oil is the best oil, which transmission fluid is the best transmission fluid. Like I stated just now, I didn't say any one of those 5 transmission fluids are better than the other. All I stated was that those are the 5 that I know that people use in these transmissions, without stating which one was better. I don't remember exactly, but if I did state one was better, I'm 99% sure that I probably stated that the ZF transmission fluid or the Mopar branded transmission fluid would be the best one, essentially because that's what came in the transmission. Not because they're better, they'll have better friction modifiers or anti-wear modifiers in it. It's because that's what came in the transmission. Essentially, whatever came in it is going to be what's best for it. So if you go and tell someone that that whatever the manufacturer fluid that came in it is the best fluid, they can't argue with it, because that's what came in it. You change that fluid out to a different fluid, the possibility of you changing, of you damaging something and not being covered under warranty because of that fluid change increases exponentially. So if you go into like aftermarket and say, Amsoil is the best, now you can get into those arguments with people like, okay, Amsoil is the best, okay, no, Mobil 1's best, no, Castrol GTX, I forgot what that GTX one is for the synthetic. I can't remember that one's the best. What weight of oil is the best? That's when you can get into those arguments. But when it comes to what came in the vehicle itself, it's really, really, really hard to argue with someone on if the factory fluid was better. Because even if the factory fluid isn't the best, I'll put it this way. Yeah, I'm going to say that. Even if the factory fluid is not the best, the fluid that came in the vehicle is what's optimized for that. Now, optimized does not mean perfect. It just means that that is the point in which the dealer has found a middle ground for performance, anti-wear, and so on and so forth. That is what that means. That does not mean that, like, yes, there's probably better transmission fluid out there for the ZF transmission, or the 845, if you want to call it that, instead of the ZF8. There's probably better transmission fluids out there. There's probably a transmission fluid that's out there that protects the transmission way better than what this does. But it's the factory fluid that was optimized to give you the best wear without sacrificing performance, and also giving, without sacrificing wear and gaining performance. A lot of manufacturers will say they gain, meet or exceed whatever it is. But here's the thing: if the manufacturer could put whatever fluid that's in that vehicle that was like the very best of the best that could go in it, they would have. So there has to be some compromise somewhere. So even though it says it meets and exceeds, what it means is like, say if, this video's dragging on. Like, let's say that you have an engine oil, and let's say the friction modifier is in it versus the actual, let's say your anti-wear. Let's say your anti-wear modifier or additive on top of the oil that gives you less friction to give you more performance. Let's say your anti-wear is about 30%, and your actual engine oil, that the rest of it that actually just gives you, lets it lubricate and do what it's supposed to do, let the engine run freely, is 70%. Well, that may be the case. Let's say the manufacturer says that anything above 30% is considered, their factory level. Well, the thing is that you can get an engine oil that has enough friction modifiers in it to allow you to decrease the horsepower, or give the engine more stress, but also give you more protection, because it will be more than the 30%. But again, you're losing on the other end of it. It's easy to say that you meet and exceed a specification, but you got to remember, the specification that you have is what the manufacturer has set. So it's not hard to find a product out there that will exceed the manufacturer's specification. What's hard is finding a part or fluid or device that will meet the specification that the dealership has, or the manufacturer has, and not just exceed it, but actually not compromise on the other end. So for instance, say it can meet and exceed the 30% up to like 50%, 50% anywhere, 50% horsepower. Not 50% like it's a 100 horsepower car, 50 horsepower. I mean like 50% of it actually, doing what it's supposed to do. Well, all that does is it meets and exceeds the anti-wear additives in it. It doesn't actually meet and exceed the entire, ability of that oil. It just meets and exceeds what the manufacturer wants for anti-wear. But there, like I said, that's a really big topic that, like, it's really in there to go to. But I'll make another video on getting into all that crap with the transmission on the ZF8. And I'll actually get into why you can't put the ATF. Well, I won't get into specifics about that, but I'll touch on it, on the differences, the obvious differences of the two. And that guy's tire is low. And I'll do that in another video, and I'm going to try to get some sleep, and I'll probably do the video when I wake up. Crossing fingers that I do that, huh? Well, I may even clean this out, who knows. Well, I'm gonna go because they're looking at me like I'm crazy, which I am, but that's a whole nother story, huh? Peace.